He stood there in front of 100 employees, his voice dripping with mockery as if I were nothing but a failed joke. But 10 days later, he had to face his company bleeding out because his biggest clients had just signed contracts. With me, I didn't leave that office in tears. I left with a plan. When a CEO thinks you're powerless, that's when you're at your strongest. If you're smart enough to wait for the killing blow. My name is Harper Collins, and for 12 years, I built my life inside the glass towers of Vanguard Solutions in downtown Chicago. At 35, I held the title of Vice President of Client Relations, but titles never told the real story. The real story was in the relationships I'd cultivated with Fortune 500 companies, the midnight calls I'd answered to save million-dollar deals, the trust I'd earned from CEOs who wouldn't sign a contract without hearing my voice first. Vanguard wasn't just a B2B software company to me. It was where I'd grown from a nervous account coordinator to someone who could walk into any boardroom and command respect. I knew every client's birthday, their kids' names, their golf handicaps. When competitors came knocking with lower prices, my clients stayed because of one thing: me. Everything changed when Charles Denham took over as CEO 6 months ago. Charles came from a private equity background, one of those guys who believed in disruption and optimization, corporate speak for gutting everything that worked and replacing it with his own people. He was 48, with silver hair that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage and suits that screamed old money. But it was his eyes that told you everything. Cold, calculating, like he was always measuring your worth against some invisible spreadsheet. The atmosphere at Vanguard shifted overnight. Where we once had collaborative Monday meetings, we now had performance assessments. Where we once celebrated team wins, we now had individual rankings posted publicly. Charles believed fear was a better motivator than loyalty. Maybe it worked on Wall Street, but Vanguard had thrived for 20 years on relationships, not ruthlessness. I became his primary target almost immediately. Not because I was failing, my numbers were the highest they'd ever been, but because I represented the old guard, the culture he wanted to eliminate, and more importantly, because my position was perfect for his nephew, fresh out of Wharton with a shiny MBA and zero real-world experience. The whispers started in the break room. Harper's on thin ice. Charles wants fresh blood in client relations. She's too comfortable, too set in her ways. It was laughable, really. My comfortable approach had retained 94% of our enterprise clients for 5 consecutive years. But facts didn't matter when the narrative had already been written. The backstabbing began subtly. Meetings I should have been invited to happened without me. My direct reports were suddenly reassigned. Client calls I'd scheduled were mysteriously canceled and rebooked with Charles present, where he'd undermine my strategies and question my methods in front of the very people who trusted me. I documented everything, every slight, every professional sabotage, every attempt to push me out. Not because I planned to sue, I knew better than to fight that kind of war. But because I needed to remember, I needed to stay sharp while they tried to dull my edges. The Thursday before it happened, my assistant Janet pulled me aside. She'd been with me for 8 years, loyal as they come. "Harper," she whispered, glancing around the empty hallway. "I overheard Charles on a call. Monday's all-hands meeting. It's not going to be good for you." I smiled and squeezed her shoulder. "Thanks for the heads up." That weekend, I didn't panic. I didn't update my resume or make desperate LinkedIn connections. Instead, I pulled out a leather notebook I'd kept for 12 years. Inside were handwritten notes from every major client I'd ever worked with. Not just business details, the real stuff. The CEO who'd confided his daughter's struggle with cancer during a contract negotiation. The CFO who'd asked my advice about switching careers. The procurement director who'd become a friend after I'd helped her navigate a messy vendor dispute. These weren't Vanguard's relationships. They were mine. As I flipped through those pages, a plan began to form. Not revenge, exactly. Just clarity about what happens when you mistake loyalty for weakness. When you assume someone who's been building for 12 years can be torn down in a single morning. Charles Denham was about to learn that in the corporate world. Like everywhere else, you should be very careful whose bridge you choose to burn. Monday morning arrived with the kind of bitter Chicago wind that cuts through your coat and straight into your bones. I dressed carefully, my best charcoal suit, the Hermes scarf a client had gifted me 5 years ago, my grandmother's pearl earrings. If I was going to be executed, I'd look impeccable doing it. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. As I walked in, I felt the shift immediately. Conversations stopped, eyes darted away. 100 employees pretending to check phones, adjust chairs, anything to avoid looking at me directly. They knew, everyone knew. Charles stood at the front, his presence commanding the room like a general before battle. He waited until exactly 9, then began with quarterly numbers, market projections, the usual corporate theater. I sat in the third row, spine straight, watching him work the room. He was good, I'd give him that. Building to something, creating tension. 20 minutes in, he pivoted. Now, let's address organizational efficiency. His eyes found mine across the room. It's come to my attention that certain departments are operating with outdated methodologies, clinging to the past when we need to embrace the future. My pulse stayed steady. I'd been preparing for this for 3 days. Harper Collins. He said my name like it tasted bad. Would you please stand? I rose slowly, smoothing my skirt, meeting his gaze without flinching. The room held its breath. Harper here represents a legacy approach to client relations. 12 years of, what would you call it, Harper, hand-holding, coddling. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. In today's market, that's not just ineffective, it's embarrassing. A few nervous chuckles from his planted allies. Most people stared at their laptops, uncomfortable witnesses to a public execution. Your Q3 numbers, Harper. Would you like to share them with everyone? 94% retention rate, I said clearly. 1.2 million in upsells, 0 client complaints. Exactly my point. He turned to address the room, gesturing dismissively. 94%. In a market where we should be achieving growth, not just retention, where we should be disrupting, not maintaining. This is what happens when someone becomes too comfortable, too reliant on personal relationships instead of professional excellence. He was rewriting reality in real time, and everyone knew it, but no one would speak up. Fear had become Vanguard's new culture. Harper Collins is a relic, he continued, warming to his theme. A dinosaur from an era when business was conducted over long lunches and golf games. She represents everything holding Vanguard back from its true potential. He paused for effect, then delivered the blow. Effective immediately. Harper Collins is no longer employed by Vanguard Solutions. Security will escort you out after this meeting. Harper, we thank you for your historical contributions. The humiliation was surgical, precise, designed not just to fire me, but to destroy my reputation, to make me an example. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of 100 pitying stares, the suffocating silence of former colleagues who wouldn't risk their own necks to defend me. Then I smiled, not broadly, just a slight upturn of lips that made Charles falter for a second. You're right about one thing, Charles, I said, my voice carrying across the room. Business isn't about long lunches anymore. I picked up my laptop bag, took 3 steps toward the door, then turned back. It's about trust, and you just showed everyone in this room exactly how much yours is worth. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked out with my head high, hearing Charles scramble to regain control of the narrative behind me. Security was waiting outside, 2 guys I'd known for years, who looked as uncomfortable as everyone else. Sorry, Harper, Mike muttered as we walked to my office. Don't be, I said, just doing your job. As I packed up 12 years of my life into a cardboard box, I thought about Charles's words. Relic, dinosaur, too comfortable. He was right about one thing. I had gotten comfortable. Comfortable enough to forget that in the corporate jungle, evolution isn't just about survival. Sometimes it's about becoming the apex predator. That night, I didn't touch the wine in my cabinet or call my friends to vent. I didn't even allow myself 10 minutes of self-pity. Instead, I spread 12 years of meticulous notes across my dining room table and got to work. By 2 a.m., I had mapped out Vanguard's entire client ecosystem, not the version in their CRM system, but the real one. The one that showed how Jennifer Martinez at Crestline Corp only renewed their $2.8 million contract because I'd personally flown to Dallas when their integration failed. How Robert Park at Meridian Financial had been ready to jump to a competitor until I'd spent a weekend rebuilding their entire implementation strategy. How Sarah Williams at Vector Logistics credited me in her board presentation for saving them $4 million in operational costs. Charles had called me a relic, but relics are valuable precisely because they're irreplaceable. I created a simple spreadsheet. 10 names, Vanguard's top 10 clients, responsible for 67% of recurring revenue. Next to each name, I wrote a date, their contract renewal date. 8 of them were coming up within the next 45 days. Charles probably didn't even know that. He was too busy disrupting to notice the foundation was about to crack. By sunrise, I had incorporated Harper & Co., Advisory, LLC, one member, one mission. Provide the kind of strategic partnership that modern corporations pretended they didn't need but desperately craved. No disruption, no buzzwords, just the radical idea that business was still, fundamentally, about human connection. I gave myself 1 day to perfect my pitch. Not a pitch, really. More like a conversation between old friends, because that's what we were. These weren't just clients. They were people I'd guided through mergers, layoffs, digital transformations, people who had my personal cell number and actually used it. Tuesday morning, I made my first call. Jennifer, it's Harper. I wanted to let you know I'm no longer with Vanguard. Yes, it was sudden. But here's the thing. I'm not calling to badmouth them or poach you. I'm calling because your renewal is in 30 days, and I want to make sure you have all the information you need to make the best decision for Crestline. The conversation lasted 90 minutes. By the end, Jennifer had asked for a proposal from Harper & Co. Advisory. Harper, she said before hanging up, I'm going to be direct. We didn't stay with Vanguard because of their software. Hell, there are 10 companies with better platforms. We stayed because of you. Send me that proposal by Friday. Wednesday. I refined my approach. No hard sell, no desperation. Just truth. I was building something new, something that put relationships first, and if they were interested, I'd love to continue our partnership. If not, I'd personally ensure their transition with Vanguard went smoothly. Professional to the very end. What I didn't say, but what every one of them understood, was that Vanguard without me was a very different company than the one they'd been working with. Thursday. I registered my business address at a small but prestigious building downtown, 6 blocks from Vanguard's tower. Close enough to be convenient for any clients who wanted to meet, far enough to show I wasn't playing games. This wasn't about proximity, it was about proximity to power. By Friday, I had my first signed letter of intent. Jennifer Martinez, exactly as I'd predicted. She didn't just want to work with Harper & Co., she wanted to be my flagship client, the case study that would help me build something extraordinary. That evening, as I sat in my home office reviewing contracts and setting up infrastructure, I thought about Charles Denham. He was probably sitting in his corner office, confident he'd eliminated a threat, cleared the path for his nephew, demonstrated his power to the troops. He had no idea that while he was playing checkers, I'd been playing chess for 12 years. And in chess, the most powerful moves are often the quietest ones. The subtle repositioning that looks like retreat but sets up inevitable checkmate. The game was just beginning. And I had 10 moves to make. 10 clients, 10 days, 10 decisions that would reshape everything. Charles thought he'd destroyed me with public humiliation. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift imaginable: freedom to build something better. And I was going to make absolutely certain he understood the true cost of his disruption. Days 1 to 3. The first dominoes. Saturday morning, day 1 of my 10-day campaign. I met Robert Park at his favorite coffee shop in the Loop, the one where he always ordered a double espresso and complained about his son's college tuition. Robert ran procurement for Meridian Financial, a $150 million logistics firm that had been with Vanguard for 7 years. "Harper," he said, shaking his head. "When I heard what happened Monday, I nearly called Charles myself. That was Bush League. What he did to you." I stirred my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "I appreciate that, Robert, but I'm not here to talk about Charles. I'm here to talk about your Q4 implementation. I know you've been having issues with the new module rollout." His eyes sharpened. "How do you know that? You've been gone 5 days." "Because I know you scheduled it for the 15th, and I know Vanguard's support team has been gutted. 3 senior engineers left last month." I pulled out a simple, one-page proposal. "I can have your implementation fixed by the end of next week. Not through Vanguard, through Harper & Co." Robert studied the document. Clean, straightforward pricing. No lock-in contracts. Just value, delivered by someone who actually understood his business. "You know what sealed it for me?" he said, signing at the bottom. "Charles sent some kid to our meeting Tuesday. 25 years old, kept calling me Rob and trying to upsell me on AI solutions when we can't even get basic reporting to work." Day 2 brought Sarah Williams from Vector Logistics and David Thompson from Pinnacle Manufacturing. Sarah was easier. We'd weathered too many storms together for her to trust anyone else with her digital transformation. David took more convincing, but when I showed him the transition plan I'd drafted, addressing every one of his pain points from memory, he stopped hesitating. "Jesus, Harper," he laughed, signing the contract. "You know our business better than our own IT department." Day 3 was strategic. Instead of another client meeting, I sent carefully crafted emails to the remaining 7 targets. Not pushy, just informational. Harper & Co. Advisory was now operational, with 3 flagship clients. If they'd like to discuss their upcoming renewals, I was available. Then I did something Charles would never understand. I waited. Days 4-5. Acceleration. By Monday morning, day 4, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Word travels fast in Chicago's business community, and 3 major clients jumping ship from Vanguard to a one-woman consultancy was the kind of gossip that spread like wildfire. Michael Harrison from Conway Financial called first. "Harper, I'm going to cut to the chase. Charles sent me a panicked email over the weekend about ensuring continuity of service. What the hell is going on over there?" "I couldn't speak to internal Vanguard matters, Michael, but I can tell you that Harper & Co. is fully operational and ready to handle your upcoming security audit. You know, the one you've been worried about for 3 months? The one nobody at Vanguard seems to understand? That's the one." He signed that afternoon. Day 5 brought the prize I'd been waiting for. Patricia Stern from Atlas Technologies. Pat represented 20% of Vanguard's revenue, a whale that Charles probably assumed was too big to move. But Pat and I had history. I'd helped her navigate a brutal merger 5 years ago, staying on calls until 3 a.m., walking her through every scenario. "I'm not going to lie, Harper," she said over lunch. "Legal is concerned about the transition. We've got 17 active projects with Vanguard." I pulled out a detailed migration plan I'd spent all night preparing. Every project mapped, every deadline accounted for, every risk mitigated. "Pat, I've been managing your account for 8 years. I know every project, every stakeholder, every potential failure point. The only thing changing is whose name is on the invoice." She studied the plan, then looked at me. "You did this last night?" "I did this over 8 years. Last night I just wrote it down." When she signed, I felt the tide turn. 5 clients in 5 days, including Vanguard's biggest account. Charles had to be feeling the heat by now, but I wasn't done, not even close. The chessboard was set, and I was about to show Charles Denham what happened when you mistook kindness for weakness, when you assumed relationships were less powerful than spreadsheets. He'd given me 10 days of freedom. I was going to make them count. Days 6-8. The avalanche. By Wednesday, day 6, Charles was in full panic mode. I knew because 3 different former colleagues had texted me about the emergency meeting he'd called at 7 a.m. Client retention crisis was the term being thrown around. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd publicly called relationships obsolete was now scrambling to save them. That morning, I met with James Crawford from Nexus Industries. James was old school. A 60-year-old CEO who still believed in handshake deals and keeping your word. He'd already received what he called an embarrassing amount of phone calls from Vanguard. First, your replacement, some kid named Bradley who couldn't tell me the difference between our enterprise and premium packages. Then some VP of sales who offered me a 30% discount to stay. Then Charles himself, practically begging. James shook his head. Harper, in 20 years of business, I've never seen anything like it. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, that my relationship was with you, not their logo, and that anyone who would humiliate a valuable employee in front of the entire company wasn't someone I wanted to do business with. James signed without negotiating. 6 down, 4 to go. Day 7 brought an unexpected gift. Maria Santos from Vertex Corporation called me directly. I hadn't even reached out to her yet. She was number 9 on my list. Harper, I'm done with Vanguard, she said without preamble. Charles showed up to our office yesterday unannounced. Tried to strong-arm me into signing a 5-year extension at current rates. When I asked about you, he actually said you were pursuing other opportunities that better matched your limited skill set. He said that? To my face, I've been in business 30 years, and I've never seen such unprofessional behavior. Where do I sign with you? 7 clients. It was Thursday, and Charles had lost over half of Vanguard's major accounts. Day 8, Friday, was when things got ugly. I was meeting with Thomas Chen from Rockwell Systems when my phone exploded with messages. Charles had sent a company-wide email, obtained somehow by my network of former colleagues, claiming I was engaged in predatory business practices and threatening legal action against anyone who participated in corporate sabotage. Thomas read the email on his phone, then looked at me over his glasses. Is he serious? Apparently. Harper, I've been practicing corporate law for 15 years before I moved into operations. Nothing you've done is illegal. Unethical? Maybe. If you were actively stealing proprietary information or violating a non-compete. But you're not, are you? Every client I've spoken to was either out of contract or in their renewal window. Every proposal I've made is based on publicly available information and my personal relationships. I haven't accessed a single Vanguard system since Monday morning. Thomas smiled. Then Charles is just blustering. Desperate people make legal threats. Successful people make moves. He signed the contract. Consider this my move. The confrontation. That afternoon, the inevitable happened. Charles called my personal cell. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Harper, we need to meet. Now. His voice was strained, missing its usual arrogant edge. I'm free at 4, the Marriott lobby on Michigan Avenue. My office would be the Marriott lobby, Charles, or not at all. I arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a visible table in the center of the lobby. Public space, witnesses, no home court advantage for him. When Charles walked in, I barely recognized him. 5 days had aged him 5 years. His perfect hair was slightly mussed, his designer suit wrinkled. He sat down without pleasantries. What's your game, Harper? No game, just business. You're destroying my company. No, Charles, I'm conducting my company. If yours is suffering, perhaps you should look at why clients are so eager to leave. His face flushed. I'll bury you in legal fees. Non-solicitation, tortious interference, corporate espionage. Try it. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Here's every communication I've had with former Vanguard clients. Every email, every contract, every proposal. You'll notice I haven't solicited anyone. They've all reached out to me. I haven't shared any proprietary information. I haven't violated any agreement because, as you might recall, You fired me without cause. No severance, no non-compete. You wanted me gone immediately, remember? He stared at the folder without opening it. You know what your problem is, Charles? I stood, gathering my things. You thought fear was power. But real power? Real power is being the person clients call at midnight when everything's falling apart. Real power is trust, built over years and destroyed in minutes. This isn't over, he said quietly. No. I agreed. It's not. I have 2 more clients to meet with. I left him sitting there, staring at the folder, finally understanding that he hadn't just fired an employee. He'd declared war on the foundation of his own company. And he was losing. Days, 9-10. The final moves, Saturday morning. Day 9, I woke to 17 missed calls and a cascade of text messages. The news had broken overnight. Vanguard's board had called an emergency meeting. Someone had leaked the numbers. 8 major clients gone, representing 48% of recurring revenue. The stock price had dropped 12% in after-hours trading, but I had work to finish. Richard Blackstone from Titan Manufacturing was my 9th target. And perhaps the most satisfying. Richard had been personally courted by Charles 6 months ago, with promises of revolutionary service improvements that never materialized. We met at his office. He insisted on working Saturdays, old school through and through. You know what Charles told me when he was trying to win our business? Richard asked, pouring himself scotch despite it being 10 a.m. He said relationship-based business was dead, that everything would be automated, algorithmic, efficient. He laughed bitterly. 6 months later, I can't get anyone on the phone when our systems go down. I answer my phone. Richard, always have, always will. I know you do. That's why I'm signing this contract. But Harper, I have to ask, is this revenge? I considered the question. No. This is what happens when you build genuine relationships for 12 years. Charles thought he was firing an employee. He was actually severing his company's lifeline. Day 10, Sunday. The grand finale. Margaret Walsh, CEO of Pinnacle Global. Vanguard's largest client. She represented 20% of their entire revenue stream, a contract worth $18 million annually. Margaret had built Pinnacle from a small logistics company into a multinational corporation through sheer force of will and an uncanny ability to read people. We met at her estate in Winnetka. She answered the door herself, dressed in gardening clothes. Harper, she said, leading me through her home to a sun-filled conservatory. I've been wondering when you'd call. I wanted to save the best for last, she smiled. Flattery? Truth. You taught me that moves should be made in order of impact. Save your strongest piece for when it matters most. And here we are. She poured tea from an antique service. Charles has called me 16 times since Thursday. 16. Do you know what he offered me yesterday? A 50% discount for 5 years. He's literally giving away the company to keep us. That's substantial. It's desperate. And desperation, Harper, is not a quality I want in a business partner. She set down her teacup. I've watched what you've done over the past 10 days. 9 clients, clean transitions, no drama, no lawsuits, just professional excellence. That's the Harper Collins I've known for a decade. Margaret, I need to be transparent. Taking Pinnacle would effectively cripple Vanguard. There's a difference between competition and what? Charles made this personal when he humiliated you. He made it business when he assumed relationships didn't matter. Now he's learning otherwise. She pulled out the contract I'd sent. I've already signed. My lawyers reviewed it yesterday. I stared at the signature line. Margaret Walsh. The killing blow. He'll have to resign, I said quietly. By tomorrow morning, I'd imagine. The board won't have a choice. The aftermath. Monday morning, day 11, the news broke officially. Charles Denham had submitted his resignation as CEO of Vanguard Solutions, effective immediately. The board's statement was carefully worded, thanking him for his brief tenure and wishing him well in his future endeavors. Corporate speak for absolute disaster. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, headhunters, potential clients who'd heard about the exodus. I ignored most of them. This had never been about publicity. Janet, my former assistant, texted me a photo from inside Vanguard. Charles's corner office, being cleaned out by maintenance, his awards, his diplomas, his carefully curated image of success. All packed into the same cardboard boxes I'd used just 10 days earlier. That afternoon, 3 more former colleagues reached out, asking if Harper & Co. was hiring. Good people who'd been terrorized by Charles's management style, who wanted to work somewhere that valued relationships over metrics, trust over fear. I hired 2 of them on the spot. We were going to need the help. The financial press had a field day. The 10-day takedown. One headline read, "How One Woman Destroyed a Corporate Titan." Read another. They missed the point entirely. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply revealed what was already broken. Charles had believed that business was about power, control, dominance. He'd stood in front of 100 employees and declared relationships obsolete, proclaimed me a relic of a bygone era. 10 days, 10 clients, one truth. In business, as in life, relationships aren't just everything, they're the only thing. And Charles Denham had learned that lesson far too late. 6 months later. The Chicago skyline looked different from my new office. Not bigger or more impressive, just different. Harper & Co. Advisory occupied the entire 40th floor of a building 6 blocks from Vanguard's tower. Close enough to be a daily reminder, far enough to be our own empire. We'd grown from 1 person to 47 in 6 months. Not because I'd actively recruited, but because the best people have a way of finding each other. Senior engineers tired of being treated like replaceable cogs. Account managers who understood that relationships weren't just metrics. Support staff who believed customer service meant actually serving customers. My assistant knocked, not Janet, though I'd offered her triple her Vanguard salary. She decided to retire early, said watching Charles's downfall was better than any bonus. "Harper, your 2 o'clock is here, Margaret Walsh." Margaret entered wearing her signature navy suit, looking like the billion-dollar CEO she was. "Nice place," she said, admiring the view. "Very you, understated but powerful. Like relationships." I smiled. "Indeed." She settled into the leather chair across from my desk. "I have news. The Vanguard board reached out yesterday. They want to discuss an acquisition. They want to buy Harper & Co. They want you back, Harper. The company's lost 70% of its value. The new CEO, remember Bradley, Charles's nephew, lasted exactly 37 days before resigning. They're hemorrhaging clients and talent." I turned to face the window, watching the city pulse below. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you already know." She was right. I'd received the same offer 3 times now, each more desperate than the last. The board wanted me to return as CEO, to rebuild what Charles had destroyed. They offered equity, autonomy, whatever it took. "I'm not going back," I said. Vanguard had 12 years to value what I brought. They chose Charles instead. That's their burden to carry. Margaret smiled. "Good, because I have a better proposal. Pinnacle is launching a new division. Enterprise consulting for mid-market companies. We need a partner. Someone who understands that business is personal, that trust beats algorithms every time. Equal partnership? 60-40, your favor. You bring the expertise and the team. We bring the infrastructure and the client base. Harper & Co. remains independent but backed by Pinnacle's resources." It was a perfect deal, the kind that only comes when you've proven your worth not through words, but through actions. "I'll have my lawyers review it," I said. I expected nothing less. Margaret stood, then paused at the door. "You know, I heard Charles is consulting now. Small businesses, mostly, teaching them about disruptive leadership." The irony was almost too perfect. The man who'd sneered at relationships was now selling them. packaged as leadership seminars for people who didn't know better. Good for him, I said, and meant it. Everyone needs to eat. Even former CEOs who learn their most important lessons too late. That evening, I stood in the same spot I'd claimed 6 months earlier, in front of my office windows, coffee in hand, watching Chicago transform from day to night. But everything else had changed. The coffee was better. We had a barista now. The view was mine, not borrowed. And the phone that rang constantly brought opportunities, not obligations. I'd spent 12 years building other people's dreams, accepting their definitions of success, their metrics for value. It took public humiliation to realize I'd been playing by the wrong rules all along. Charles had called me a relic, a dinosaur, too comfortable with the old ways. He was partially right. I had been comfortable being undervalued, comfortable being overlooked, comfortable building kingdoms for kings who couldn't even pronounce my name correctly in their victory speeches. But comfort and complacency aren't the same thing. I'd been comfortable because I knew my worth, even when they didn't. I'd been building my real network while they focused on org charts. I'd been creating unbreakable bonds while they practiced management by fear. The city lights sparkled below, each one representing a business, a dream, a relationship waiting to be built. Harper & Co. was just getting started. We had more clients than we could handle, more talent than we had space for, more opportunities than hours in the day. And somewhere out there, in a small office or a rented conference room, Charles Denham was teaching other people about leadership. I hoped he'd learned something worth sharing. As for me, I'd learned the most valuable lesson of all. When someone shows you how little they value you, believe them, then show them exactly what they lost. I raised my coffee cup to the window, toasting the city that had taught me everything and the future I'd claimed for myself. I didn't need to take revenge on him. I just needed to do what he could never do. Make people trust in a person, not just a logo. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts or experiences. Have you ever had a moment where someone underestimated you, only to realize their mistake? I'd love to hear about it in the comments.